All right, guys, I'm going to try to make this one really brief and easy to follow because I think it is a lot of relevant and very important information. I'm going to try to consolidate all of it here for you so that you don't have to go digging for sources. Of course, I will be citing them about the Trump shooter and how this situation happened from a logistics standpoint and what the questions are and who the shooter appears to be at this current time, which is July 17th. I will be trying to share everything we know and some of the relevant points connected to that. First of all, the director of the Secret Service, Kim Cheadle, who is a Biden appointee with ties to Jill Biden, reportedly, said that there were no counter snipers or guards on the roof where the sniper took place to attempt to kill Donald Trump. And she said that this happened because the roof was sloped and it was a possible danger. The problem with that statement is not only does it sound ridiculous on its face, but we know that it's a lie because we have pictures of the counter snipers who actually killed the shooter on a sloped roof. We, of course, have other pictures of Secret Service on even more sloped roofs at the White House. So that is fact number one. I'm going to try to keep speculation as much to a minimum as I can on this topic. However, it's really difficult because we don't know much, so a lot is going to at least be open to speculation. So all I will say to close this point is we know it's false that snipers don't go on sloped roofs. They were on a sloped roof at the very same rally. We see them elsewhere on sloped roofs, and this raises the very relevant question, why weren't they on there? And then why, after the fact, lie about it and about your procedures? We don't know, but that is something absolutely that needs to be answered. On to the next point. We know that sometime before the shooting, the shooter was observed using a rangefinder. For any who don't know, that is a device that looks something like this. And as the name indicates, it is used exclusively for finding the range, specifically for hunting or making bow or rifle shots. This is basically like holding up a sign saying, I'm planning to shoot someone here. This point is laughably ridiculous. And the fact that this was observed and the shooter still managed to get into position and rip off multiple shots at the president and at innocent bystanders is absolutely beyond the pale. But let's move on. We know that the shooter was seen by security as suspicious to the point that they took a picture of him, but did nothing else. We have reports that the shooter was seen milling about, even staring at the roof before leaving and then returning with a rather large bag or backpack before he used what is now reported as an AC unit to get onto the roof. And previous to that, they were saying a ladder. Which exactly it was is unclear at this point. We know that there were agents in but not on the building in question. Now, of course, that sounds like an oversight on its face, but it gets more absurd when, if you're like me and you've ever been on a farm or perhaps at a gun range or even a park with a metal roof, and you've heard something walking on the roof, whether it's a squirrel or an acorn hitting the roof. These metal roof buildings are insanely loud. I think most people underestimate how loud it is to walk on a roof, period, to someone in the building, much more so on a metal roof. To an untrained ear, this would have been something quite alarming to hear. A full-grown man, this was a 20-year-old, holding baggage, so even heavier than a full-grown man, crawling and walking on a roof to the vantage point. The fact that no one heard and did something about this when they're all connected via comms devices is again absurd. We then know that the shooter actually pointed his gun at an officer who peeked their head over the roof. The officer then retreated down the roof, and we don't exactly know what that officer did next. So just to summarize, let me put this in context and lay it out for you really quickly. We know that security saw the shooter using a rangefinder. We know that security thought the shooter was suspicious enough to take a picture of him, but apparently not to approach and detain him. We know that the agency and bystanders reported seeing the man both on the roof, looking at the roof, and milling about before returning with a bag and using some device, whether a ladder or an air conditioning unit, to get onto the roof. We know that for some reason, agents were stationed in but not on the building. This is quite difficult to accept for two main reasons. Number one, because the excuse given for them not being on the building, we know is a falsehood. We know that it's a lie based on pictures taken of other slope buildings at the same event. It's also weird because we know that the people in the building, as of right now, say nothing about hearing the footsteps on a loud metal roof as this individual climbed right over their heads. Finally, we know that bystanders say that they saw him climbing up and onto the vantage point. They were trying to draw the attention of security, and we know that at least one officer poked their head up onto the roof and then had the gun pointed at them before retreating. Now, was an emergency call placed? Was the president immediately rushed off stage? Were snipers radioed to be trained on the position, ready to immediately kill the man who had just pointed his rifle at a law enforcement officer at a presidential event? We don't have reports that any of this happened. Maybe they will come out, maybe they did, but right now it seems that an officer saw the shooter, had a gun pointed at them, knowing that the shooter had a line to the president and to a crowd of civilians, and then left. So look, this really leaves us with two options. Option number one is that this is an historic security failure. This is a failure of elite level security that we have not seen in my lifetime. I'm in my early 30s, and I don't know of anything in the United States that has been so terribly bad in instance after instance after instance of the same event. That's option number one. Option number two is that this was at some level allowed to happen. I'm not asserting either of those options. I don't know. None of us do know right now. But if you can come up with a likely third option, please let me know. Then I said that we'd get to know the shooter a little bit, as much as we can. And there's really not much to say here other than that it only gets a bit weirder. This was a 20-year-old registered Republican who seems to have never voted for anyone in his life due to his age, whether Republican or Democrat, who was a Democrat donor, had only ever donated to the left through Act Blue. Now, those facts are a little bit odd, but not entirely unheard of when we remember the fact that Democrats registering Republicans so that they can participate in local meetings and throw off things like primary elections is actually a known and documented historical happening, which spans back several years. But then this young man, who was so politically passionate and unhinged that he wanted to kill the former president and leader of the conservative world, doesn't really have any social media or documented presence, any memos or suicide note, nothing like that that could draw us closer to understanding why and how he did what he did. Was he influenced by an increasingly tumultuous political and cultural scene, which sees tweets and headlines and articles and magazine covers like these coming out from leaders? Very likely, but we don't know because we don't have any exact documentation from him. Call me crazy, but a radical 20-year-old activist having zero presence in the public seems very odd and hard to believe. That's about all for now, guys. I apologize that there's a lot of we don't know. My last thought, though, is this. Don't let anyone label you a conspiracy theorist for asking relevant questions. Thanks and have a good one.